What would you do if the person you thought was ordinary turned out to be someone who literally built the company you've been working for? Imagine thinking you're giving career advice to a struggling retiree, only to find out he's a co-founder, the genius behind everything you thought you knew. Would you apologize? Would you panic? Or would you try to play it cool and hope nobody notices? Comment below, backhand index pointing down. What would you do in this situation? Be honest, and remember, the wrong answer might just get you schooled in real life. Weddings. A curious mix of lace, speeches, and people wearing shoes at pinch. On the day my daughter married, I found myself face to face with her rather self-assured groom. You know the type. Hair a little too neat, smile a little too polished, and a confidence that tend to spill over like an overfilled pint. Well, introductions were made, and he presented me to his boss with all the charm of a man announcing the raffle prizes. This, he declared proudly, is my fiancé's father, currently unemployed. A pause. Then, with just the faintest smirk, Bill Loser, really. Now, you'd think that sort of remark might ruffle a fellow. But I barely had time to sip my water before his boss smiled, clapped me warmly on the shoulder, and said, "Good to see you, partner." Partner. Lovely word. That. Strong, dependable. You should have seen the groom's face. Rather like someone who's just bitten into what they thought was a grape and discovered as an olive. To top it off, the boss turned him with a calm. "You're fired." Well, that shut him up faster than a vicar's glare at a rowdy best man. But before we get lost in that little drama, let me take you to the quieter moment that followed. Lake View Grill. Corner table. White tablecloths that had clearly seen better days. And a view of the lake that was, well, mostly car park if you lean the wrong way. Derek Harrington. That's the groom in question. Smoothed down his tie with such precision you'd think he was about to perform surgery. Nancy, my daughter, sat beside him positively glowing, her engagement ring catching the light like it wasn't on The Secret. "Mr. Wood," Derek began, with the confidence of a man who orders sparkling water without asking the price. "Nancy tells me you're between opportunities right now." Between opportunities. Isn't that marvelous? Like being unemployed but in a designer suit. The sort of phrase that smells faintly of aftershave and PowerPoint presentations. "I'm retired," I said, unfolding my napkin as if that settled the matter. Derek's smile widened, though not in the eyes. Mind you, oh no, the eyes were busy judging my tie. "Right, of course." He leaned back, puffing himself up like a pigeon on a windowsill. "I work at Technova Innovations, Senior Manager of Corporate Sales, top AI solutions provider in the Midwest. Increased my department's numbers by 40% in 3 years. Sounds impressive," I murmured, the way you'd respond if someone proudly told you they'd memorize the entire bus timetable. And so it went on. Talk of seminars, networking, the future of business, efficiency this, innovation that. He even found time to reassure me that at my age the main thing was keeping busy with hobbies. Hobbies. As though the highlight of my week was knitting socks for the cat. When it came time to order, Nancy chose the herb-crusted chicken. Derek went straight for the salmon with truffle risotto. Naturally, I asked for the soup and sandwich combo. A modest choice, you'll agree, though apparently enough for Derek to raise an eyebrow that could curdle milk. "Everyone has different budgets," he said magnanimously, with a little wave of the hand. Budgets. As though my soup was a cry for financial aid. Bless him. And on he went, dissecting his salmon with all the finesse of a man who believes he's conquering the world one spreadsheet at a time. He spoke of dead weight, by which he meant older employees, the poor souls whose decades of experience were, in his eyes, nothing more than ballast. Nancy shifted uneasily. I stirred my tomato bisque, rather good, actually, and filed the phrase away like a note in the margin of a book. At one point, he glanced at my bowl and remarked, with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, "Passion separates the winners from those who settle for less." "Settling can be a choice," I said quietly, spoon resting in the bowl. He missed the edge of my voice entirely. Too busy congratulating himself. He carried on goals, timelines, promotions. The man had a 5-year plan so detailed you'd think he was scheduling his own obituary. Then, with astonishing generosity. He offered to introduce me to contacts. Entry-level positions, mind you. Nothing too demanding for a chap of my vintage. Entry-level. For me. Oh, the irony. I could have served it as pudding. That's very generous, I said, smiling into my soup. After all, weddings are about harmony, aren't they? And besides, I've always believed experience teaches you when to hold your tongue and when to sharpen it. Now, Derek, bless him, had a fondness for talking about himself in the way some men collect stamps. Tirelessly. Successful people, he announced with all the gravitas of a bishop unveiling a new hymn book, have a responsibility to lift others up. Nancy, my daughter, beamed as if he'd just declared world peace. See, Dad? Derek really cares about people. Oh, I can tell, I said, sipping my water with the solemnity of a man tasting fine wine. Your compassion is quite evident. Derek preened, mistaking my dry observation for flattery. It's not about the money for me, Mr. Wood. Don't get me wrong, the six-figure salary is nice, but it's about building something meaningful. 6 figures. He said it as though he'd just split the atom. Building something meaningful, I repeated gently, like Technova itself was built. He chuckled. Well, that was different. The founders were just lucky, I suppose. Right place, right time. The real innovation's happening now, with people like me pushing the envelope. Lucky. 30 years of 18-hour days, missed anniversaries, and ulcers neatly repackaged as luck. I let the word roll around my tongue like a bitter lozenge. The founders were lucky, I said slowly. Had to be. I mean, what did they really know about AI back then? Technology barely existed. They must have stumbled into it. Derek laughed, a sound rather like cutlery being scraped across porcelain. Exactly. Now we're doing the real work, turning their accidental success into something professional. Nancy misread the tightening in my jaw. Dad, Derek just wants to help. He knows the job market is tough for people starting over. Starting over. As though my entire career had been erased with one of those pink school rubbers, leaving me to begin afresh like a lad just out of sixth form. Starting over can be liberating, I said, careful to keep my voice calm. It gives you perspective on what really matters. Exactly. Derek pounced on the remark. That's the spirit. Fresh start, new opportunities. You just have to be realistic about your limitations. My limitations? The phrase hung between us, sharp and cold. Well, he flapped a hand vaguely. Age is a factor. Technology moves fast. Older workers struggle to keep up. Companies want people who can grow with them long-term. Long-term growth, I echoed, faintly amused. Say 30 years? Precisely. He beamed, pleased that his student had caught on. Though obviously starting at your age, you've only got, 5 to 10 years left before retirement. Companies invest in futures, not, he faltered. Not what? I asked softly. Not short-term situations, he finished, with the courage of a man backpedaling a bicycle uphill. Nancy reached for my hand. Dad, maybe we should talk about something else. But Derek was now fully in his stride. The business world rewards vision, Mr. Wood. Drive. Innovation. It's not enough just to show up anymore. You need to disrupt existing paradigms. Disrupt paradigms, I murmured. Lovely. Exactly. That's what I'm doing at Technova. The old guard there, stuck in her outdated ways, clinging to the past. Sometimes you have to tear the old systems down to build something better. I placed my napkin neatly on the table. It was a small gesture, but it had the desired effect. Derek faltered. Excuse me, I said, rising. I think I need some air. Nancy's voice wavered. Dad, are you all right? Just tired. I set $40 on the table, enough for soup, sandwich, and tip. That should cover my portion. Derek's eyes widened. Mr. Wood, you don't have to. I insist, I replied, straightening my jacket. Thank you for dinner, and for the career advice. Nancy half rose. Dad, please don't leave. Derek didn't mean. Derek meant exactly what he said. I interrupted, fixing the young man with a level look, and I heard every word. The drive home gave me 45 minutes of uninterrupted reflection, which is far more dangerous than anger. Derek's words echoed mile after mile. Lucky founders, dead weight, starting over at your age. By the time I reached my driveway, the indignation had cooled into something steadier, sharper. Purpose. My study waited like an old friend. The walls were lined with mementos, though I kept them discreet from casual visitors. Framed photographs, awards, even the original incorporation papers of Technova, signed in 1995 by Walter Klein and me. Yes, me. There were the photos from our first product launch, the industry awards, the framed Forbes article calling me the quiet revolutionary of AI innovation. And on my desk, one photograph in particular, Walter and me, two young men in a cramped garage, utterly convinced we could change the world. And, as it turned out, we had. I settled into my chair and dialed Walter. He picked up on the second ring, as he always did. Porter, how was dinner with the future son-in-law? Enlightening, I said. We chatted. He laughed, as only old friends can. He told me Derek, yes, the very same Derek, had been making noises at the company. Ambitious, hungry, muttering about modernizing and disrupting outdated paradigms. Even suggesting there was too much senior deadweight. Interesting perspective. I managed, my hand tightening on the phone. Between you and me, Walter added. He's got ideas, but I can't decide if it's admirable ambition or dangerous arrogance. I stared at the old photograph of us in the garage. Maybe both, I murmured. Anyway, the board loves him, Walter said. But I miss having someone around who remembers why we started this company. I remember perfectly, I said softly. That's exactly why I'm staying away a little longer. When I hung up, I opened my laptop, the glow illuminating 3 decades of effort. Annual revenues, approaching $200 million. So much for luck. Over 800 employees across 4 states. That was Technova. Not a bad legacy. Really, though in Derek Harrington's view it had all been a result of lucky stumbling, like finding a tenner in the street. I leaned back in my chair that night, and, for the first time since dinner, allowed myself a smile. Derek wanted to disrupt paradigms. He wanted to eliminate dead weight. Splendid. I'd give the boy exactly what he was asking for. The wedding was set for June the 15th. 4 months away. For months in which Derek could continue basking in his own certainty, parading his ambition before Nancy, the family, and anyone else polite enough to listen. And 4 months for me to prepare the most educational experience of his young life. I pulled out a legal pad and began jotting down notes. His little digs at lucky founders, his disdain for older employees, his suggestion I might fancy an entry-level position. Every smug assumption, every insult dressed up as advice. Derek believed in tearing down old systems. Excellent. I would let him have a go. I glanced at the old garage photograph again. Walter and I, barely out of our 20s, sleeves rolled up, standing in that drafty space with nothing but determination and maxed out credit cards. We'd earned every bit of what came later. And Derek thought experience without adaptation was stagnation. He'd soon discover what 3 decades of adaptation looked like when it was pointed directly at him. So I closed the laptop, switched off the study lamp, and headed upstairs. I had a role to play. After all, the harmless retiree, the amiable old fellow with a garden to tend, and too much time on his hands. And meanwhile, a lesson preparer. Derek wanted to see what happened when successful people helped the less fortunate. Oh, he would. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch with a newspaper when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the living room window, I watched Derek's BMW glide to a halt. Out he stepped, straightening his suit jacket with all the solemnity of a man about to address Parliament. Nancy bounced up the steps, clutching a cream-colored envelope as though it were the crown jewels. "Dad!" she burst in, practically glowing. "We have something wonderful to show you." Behind her, Derek followed more slowly, his eyes skimming my modest furniture with that look. You know the one, polite disappointment, as if he walked into a pub only to discover it didn't serve craft gin. "Mr. Wood," he said, offering a brisk handshake. Hope we're not interrupting your afternoon activities. Afternoon activities. He made it sound as though I spent my days alternating between daytime television and crossword puzzles. Not at all. I replied cheerfully. What brings you here? Nancy presented the envelope with great ceremony. The official wedding invitation. You're the very first to see it. I opened it carefully. Thick cardstock, elegant calligraphy. Quite the production. Beautiful. I said warmly, June 15th, Lakeshore Country Club. Very elegant indeed. Derek chose a venue. Nancy said proudly. It's where all the important Technova events are held, Derek added, chest expanding a little. Location matters for occasions like this. My boss will be attending, along with several board members. I wanted somewhere that reflects, he gestured vaguely at my living room, professional standards. Sounds impressive, I said mildly, setting the invitation on the table. I suppose I'd best start thinking about what to wear. This, it turned out, was Derek's cue. He leaned forward, voice dropping into what he must have thought was tactful concern. Actually, Mr. Wood, that's something I want to discuss. My boss, Walter Clean, very influential in our industry, will be there. Perhaps you should dress a little more presentably than usual. Nancy shot him a warning look, but Derek pressed on. Walter expects a certain level of sophistication from the families of his employees. First impressions matter enormously in business. Sophistication. If only Derek knew Walter, and I had once considered it an achievement to wear socks that matched. Don't worry, son, I said gently. I know how to handle bosses. Derek's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Walter built Technova from nothing. You know, a man like that notices everything. How you dress, how you speak, how you carry yourself. Built from nothing. Walter would enjoy that description, considering the nothing in question had included his wife's credit card limit and my mother's old typewriter. Really, I murmured, it'll be interesting to meet him. Something in my tone must have struck Derek as inadequate, because he leaned in earnestly. I'm not trying to be difficult, Mr. Wood, but this wedding represents my professional future too. Walter's opinion of my family connections could affect my career trajectory. I need everyone to make the right impression. The right impression. Translation. I must appear successful enough to reflect well on him, but not so successful as to outshine him. A delicate balance. What kind of impression are you hoping for? I asked. Respectable. Conservative. Someone who values hard work and traditional principles. Derek said, in the tone of a teacher explaining fractions to a slow pupil. Walter respects people who've earned their place through dedication and merit. Earned their place through dedication and merit. Quite. 30 years of it, in fact. Sensing the tension, Nancy jumped in. Dad, maybe we should look at your suit together. I can help you pick out a tie. That's very thoughtful, darling, I said, smiling at her. I'm sure I can find something appropriate. But Derek wasn't finished. The important thing is projecting dignity. Walter has very traditional ideas about family values and personal responsibility. He believes people should present themselves with pride, regardless of their circumstances. Regardless of their circumstances. The phrase floated in the air like a compliment wearing an ill-fitting disguise. I understand completely, I said softly. Presentation does say a great deal about character. Exactly. Derek beamed, pleased that his lesson had been absorbed. Character matters more than bank accounts to men like Walter. If only he knew. Authentic quality, Derek had said. Walter certainly could spot it. He and I had been recognizing it in each other for 30 years, usually over a takeaway pizza and far too much coffee. Nancy, bless her, suggested we step into the garden. Showed Derek the tomato plants, she said, though I suspect the real crop she wanted to inspect was me. Through the glass, Derek hovered over the seating chart she'd left on the dining table, looking as though he were solving some ancient riddle. It was almost poetic, watching him shuffle names about like pawns in a game he didn't quite understand. We settled onto the garden bench, the late afternoon sun slanting across the neat rows of vegetables. Dad, she began, her tone heavy with that particular weight daughters use when they're about to call their fathers to account. I braced myself. What are you planning? Planning? Oh! Nothing sinister. Just trying to be a good host to my future son-in-law. Don't. She turned sharply towards me. I've known you my whole life. You're up to something. And it involves Derek. Through the window, Derek was bent over, lips moving as if he were already practicing introductions. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Sweetheart, I said gently, sometimes people need time to show their true nature. Nancy's eyes narrowed. Why won't you tell him the truth about Technova? Why are you letting him think you're just some unemployed old man who needs career advice? There it was. My daughter had always been far more perceptive than Derek gave her credit for. You know about Technova? I asked carefully. I've always known. Maybe not the fine print. But I knew you didn't just work there. You helped build it. The photographs. The awards you think I don't notice the way Walter talks about you on the phone. Dad, why lie to the man I'm going to marry? I'm not lying, Nancy. I'm simply not volunteering information. That's the same thing. Has Derek ever asked? Really asked who I am? Not my job title, not my pension, but me? She started to speak, then stopped. We both knew the answer. Derek hadn't asked, because Derek thought he already knew. Her eyes shimmered. But it isn't fair. He doesn't know he's being tested. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. People judge us every day on appearances, on titles, on clothes. The question is, what sort of man is Derek when he thinks the other fellow has no importance? Through the glass, Derek was now pacing, phoned his ear, gesturing with the urgency of someone explaining how to save civilization through conference calls. You saw how he treated me at dinner, I said quietly. The little barbs, the dismissals. Is that really the man you want to build a life with? Nancy was silent a long while, eyes fixed on Derek's animated silhouette. He's not always like that, she said softly. When it's just us, he's different. Kinder. I don't doubt it. But character isn't how we behave when it's easy, my love. It's how we behave when nobody important is watching. Her voice half pleading, half curious. So you're planning some sort of lesson? I smiled. Let's just call it an educational experience. He'll learn that respect isn't about bank balances or business cards. That kindness shouldn't be conditional. And if he doesn't learn, well, then you'll know who you're marrying. She twisted the engagement ring round her finger, the sun scattering tiny rainbows over the garden soil. And if I decide he's exactly who I thought he was, then I'll dance at your wedding, Nancy, and I'll welcome him with joy. But only if you're seeing him clearly, not to the fog of what you hope is there. From inside, Derek tapped his watch against the glass, reminding us both that the West Coast was waiting for his wisdom. He's going to hate you when he finds out, Nancy murmured. Probably. The real question is, will he hate himself? She studied me for a long moment, torn between loyalty and love, then nodded. All right, Dad, I'll keep your secret. But promise me this isn't just revenge. I squeezed her hand. I promise. Everything I'm doing is because I love you. She sighed, brushing dirt from her jeans, and gave me a final warning. Just be gentle with him. I said, kissing her forehead. Gentle lessons are rarely the ones that last. The months drifted by, March into June, with Derek making his little check-ins, the casual advice, the condescension wrapped in silk. Nancy kept our quiet pact. And I planned with all the care one gives to a garden, patient, deliberate, knowing the harvest would come in its season. 3 days before the wedding, I stood in Armando's tailoring, examining my reflection in a three-way mirror. The charcoal suit was perfectly cut, understated, but carrying the quiet authority of a man who knows exactly who he is. This will emphasize your dignity without shouting about price tags, Armando assured me, adjusting a shoulder. Precisely, I said, the right things without a word spoken. He smiled approvingly. True quality whispers, sir. It never shouts. 2 days later, I was in a jeweler's on the Gold Coast, inspecting cufflinks, discreet, elegant, with the Technova crest picked out in platinum. A commemorative piece, I told the saleswoman. And indeed it was, though perhaps not in the way Derek would imagine. They caught the light beautifully. Those cufflinks, Just the right balance of subtle and distinctive. Not showy, no, but the sort of thing Walter would recognize instantly. We'd talk about commissioning them 3 years earlier, back when authentic quality still meant something you could spot without a spreadsheet. The day before the wedding, I paid a visit to Jonathan Pierce, my banker, private banker, if we're being precise. His corner office perched above Lake Michigan like a lighthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel small and prosperous at the same time. He raised his eyebrows at the figure on the check. Quite a substantial amount for a wedding gift. Are you sure about this, Porter? Absolutely. I said, signing the papers with deliberate care. My daughter deserved the finest gift I can give. $50,000, he murmured, almost to himself. Even for you, that's generous. I asked for a certified check. I wanted the number in bold, black ink, clear for all to see. Sometimes symbolism is worth the fee. That evening I walked the shoreline, as I often did when serious thinking was required. The lake stretched away, a sheet of calm glass under the setting sun. Tomorrow, of course, there would be storms. But storms, I've always thought, have their uses. They clear the air. Walter would recognize the cufflinks in an instant. He'd remember our conversation about them. He'd look across the family table, and instead of down-on-his-luck father-in-law, he'd find his old partner, the man who'd built Technova with him in those early days when sophistication meant remembering to wear socks at all. Meanwhile, Derek had spent months painting me as an amiable irrelevance, a polite bit of furniture. Tomorrow, he would learn that assumptions can be very expensive indeed. My phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. Rehearsal dinner tomorrow at 6. Derek's very excited about you meeting Walter. Still time to change your mind, Dad. I tapped back. Looking forward to it, sweetheart. Everything will work out exactly as it should. Which, in a way, was a truth. Derek would show his character. The only difference was at this time, there would be an audience that mattered. The next evening I drove to the Drake Hotel, feeling rather like a chess player about to deliver checkmate. Its marble lobby gleamed beneath the chandeliers, my reflection multiplied in every polished surface. The rehearsal was in a small chapel, mahogany pews, stained glass looking out on Michigan Avenue. Nancy stood at the front, radiant even in her rehearsal dress, though I could read the tension in her shoulders. She caught my eye, gave me a nervous smile, the look of someone sitting on a secret. Derek arrived with his colleagues, straightening his tie in that way of his half-show, half-habit. He spotted me and raised his voice, as though announcing a special guest at a company meeting. Everyone, this is Nancy's father, Mr. Porter Wood, retired now, living modestly in Evanston. Living modestly. The words floated in the air like expensive perfume, carefully chosen to establish a pecking order. A woman, in a sharp blazer, shook my hand. Derek tells us you're enjoying retirement. Very much so, I replied. Retirement can be educational. They nodded politely and lost interest. In their world, retirees were pleasant enough, but essentially wallpaper. Dad has simple tastes, Derek continued, his tone pitched just loud enough for the surrounding group to hear. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Different generations, different expectations. The muscles in my jaw tightened. Be careful with judgments, Derek, I said quietly. Tomorrow might bring surprises. He laughed. Mr. Wood, you don't need to lecture me. Reading character is what I do for a living. It's essential in sales. We'll see. Something in my tone gave him pause. But with his colleagues watching, retreat wasn't an option. He pressed on. Success leaves clues. How someone dresses, where they live, what they drive. Those things reveal their priorities and capabilities. Interesting theory. I murmured. Not theory. Observation. Take Walter, my boss. You can spot his quality from across a room. That's earned respect, not accident. Walter would have laughed to hear that. He and I had earned our respect together. Sleeping on office floors, eating pizza for breakfast, and carrying on in spite of experts who said we wouldn't last 6 months. Nancy edged closer, sensing danger. Maybe we should focus on tomorrow's ceremony. But Derek was in full flow now, the audience feeding him. The point is, character shows and choices. Walter chose excellence. Others, he gestured vaguely at me, choose comfort over achievement. Comfort over achievement. A neat little barb. Polite enough to pass unnoticed by most. Sharp enough to land precisely where he meant it to. You're very confident in your assessments, I said, my voice beginning to carry the faint edge of steel. Confidence comes from accuracy. I've never misjudged anyone. Not once. I stood slowly, fastening my jacket. Conversations around us stilled, that peculiar hush of a room sensing that something was about to happen. Derek, I said at last, you're absolutely right about one thing. Character does show in choices. He smiled, thinking he'd won the point. Exactly. Tomorrow, I said, you'll have several opportunities to demonstrate yours. Ah, Derek. There was again that little tremor in his voice, the first faint crack in the polished facade. He asked what I'd meant, as if the words themselves were the problem rather than the truth behind them. I left him to puzzle out, of course. Some lessons, after all, need to sit overnight before they ripen properly. I offered him a polite good night and strolled from the chapel as though I had all the time in the world. One does try to maintain dignity in front of an audience, particularly when the audience consists of one's daughter's future in-laws and a smattering of curious colleagues. Behind me, Derek was no doubt explaining my departure as the wounded pride of an old man. Let him. Explanations are often more revealing than events themselves. The Chicago night was cool. The hotel doorman gave me a courteous nod, and I walked to my car with the calm certainty of a man awaiting tomorrow's curtain rise. Yes, Derek would have his stage, but not quite the play he'd rehearsed. The drive back to Evanston was half an hour of transformation. Irritation melting into purpose, anger cooling into that quiet resolve one feels when injustice is not only possible but inevitable. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my modest home, the same home Derek once sneered as evidence of my supposed mediocrity, I felt nothing but clarity. Tomorrow, he would learn that square footage and brand names aren't the sole arbiters of success. Walter had sent me an email earlier, cheerful as ever, looking forward to meeting the ambitious young man. Ambitious. Yes, that's one word. Others came to mind, but politeness is a habit that sticks, even when provoked. I replied simply that he'd be meeting someone very interesting, and he would. My suit hung ready, pressed and patient, like an understudy waiting for its cue. The cufflinks, Technova's discreet little emblem in platinum, lay in their velvet box, gleaming with promise. Beside them, the certified check, $50,000, chosen with surgical precision. Not ostentatious enough to be vulgar, but quite impossible to ignore. A little punctuation mark, really, in tomorrow's carefully composed lesson. Nancy, bless her, texted me again that night. She was worried, of course. Children always imagine justice to be harsher than it truly is. I reassured her. Justice, when done properly, has the elegance of a well-played chess match. No shouting, no table thumping. Just the quiet inevitability of checkmate. Sleep came easily. When one has rehearsed a scene as long as I had, the night before feels less like anticipation, and more like tidying the stage before the curtain rises. And then June the 15th, a crisp, clear morning. Chicago gleamed, as though the city itself had been polished for the occasion. I dressed with precision that bordered on theatrical. The cufflinks slid into place with a soft click. The sort of sound only the wearer notices, but all the more satisfying for it. By noon, the Drake Hotel was humming with wedding activity. Nancy was upstairs, fussing with veils and last-minute nerves. No doubt. I slipped quietly into the chapel, where guests were already beginning to gather. Walter stood at the front, dignified as ever in his navy suit, scanning the room with that curious mix of detachment and interest one sees in men who built empires. He caught my eye, offered me the briefest nod, stranger to stranger, and turned back to his people. And then Derek appeared. Resplendent, yes, but just a shade too polished, like a salesman who's discovered cologne counter half an hour before the meeting. His confidence floated before him like a fragrance, a little too strong, a little too eager to be noticed. When his eyes found mine, I caught it. The flicker, just a flicker. The memory of last night's warning had unsettled him. He covered it quickly, of course, striding over with forced joviality. "Mr. Wood," he boomed, as though we were old drinking companions. "Glad you decided to come after our discussion last night. The performance had begun. Wouldn't miss it for the world." I told him, and meant it too. Though I confess, it wasn't the sort of world he had in mind. Derek's smile twitched at the corners, but he pressed on, far too busy choreographing today's little performance to waste time on cryptic warnings from his apparently harmless father-in-law. His colleagues had bagged the third row, prime seats of spectacle, though they didn't yet know it. The music swelled. I took my post by the chapel doors, and then there she was, Nancy, my Nancy, radiant in her grandmother's restored wedding gown, every stitch humming with family history. For a moment, my carefully arranged schemes fell away, replaced with nothing more than the pride of a father. Funny thing, revenge plots, they shrink considerably when your daughter takes your arm and smiles like that. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. "Thank you, Dad," she replied, her voice trembling with nerves and joy all tangled up together. Down the aisle we went, slow and steady, while the guests rose in that ancient ritual of respect. Derek waited at the altar, eyes fixed on Nancy with an affection so unguarded it almost made me forgive him. Almost. Walter, meanwhile, sat in the front row, watching with polite detachment. The look of a man still calculating exactly how much enthusiasm an employee's wedding merits. When the question came, "Who give this woman in marriage?" I answered clearly, for all to hear. "I do, her father, with great love and hope for her happiness." It sounded simple, yet felt like the heaviest sentence I'd ever spoken. I kissed her cheek, placed her hand in Derek's, and took my seat, my role in the theater tradition complete. The ceremony was lovely, properly so. Vows exchanged with genuine feeling, even if a certain undercurrent of tension hummed beneath it all. For a while, I allowed myself to be moved. One has to be careful, you see. If you spend the entire time sharpening swords in your mind, you can miss the simple beauty of two people in love. Walter glanced at me once or twice. Curious perhaps, but otherwise unmoved. Not for long. Of course. His turn was coming. The vows concluded. The kiss was performed, enthusiastic to the point of overstatement, and the chapel burst into applause. Bells chimed, people clapped, and Derek's chest puffed up at a man who'd not only won the match, but written the rule book. He looked positively triumphant. Poor fellow. At the reception, champagne and jazz filled the hall, chandeliers throwing diamonds of light across the polished floor. Derek worked the room with all the flourish of a man who believes social climbing is an Olympic sport. Nancy glowed at his side, her happiness genuine, if somewhat distracted by her husband's perpetual self-promotion. Walter stood by the great windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the very picture of distinction, surveying the crowd like a general reviewing the troops. Derek spotted him, straightened his tie with unconscious precision, and marched across the room with Nancy in tow. This, he clearly believed, was the big moment. "Mr. Clean," he announced, voice pitched perfectly to be overheard. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Nancy, and her father." I drifted closer, timing the moment with the care of a watchmaker. For months of patience about to strike the hour, Walter shook Nancy's hand warmly, congratulating her in that brisk executive way. Derek beamed, chest swelling again. And then, with a faint flourish, one might even say a smirk, he gestured in my direction. "And this is my father-in-law, Porter Wood. He's an unemployed retiree, lives modestly in Evanston." The words hung there, faintly scented with superiority, designed to put everyone neatly in their place. A few of Derek's colleagues leaned in, expecting to see their young star make one final display of social one-upmanship. Walter turned toward me, slowly. His eyes moved from my face down to my cufflinks. And there it was, recognition. 30 years of history glittering under a chandelier. "Porter?" His voice cracked with astonishment. "Porter Wood." Derek blinked. You know him?" "Know him?" Walter barked a short laugh that turned a dozen heads. "Good heavens, man, this is Porter Wood, co-founder of Technova. My business partner for 30 years. The silence that followed was magnificent. Derek's face drained of color, the grin collapsing into something between disbelief and horror. Around us, conversations froze mid-sentence as the wedding guests scented drama, that rarest and most delicious of wedding courses. "Partner?" Derek croaked, his voice suddenly several octaves higher. That's impossible. He's just... Yes, Derek. Walter's tone sharpened like a knife across a whetstone. Just what? And there it was. The trap had sprung. Quietly, inevitably, as natural as night following day. "Just a man who built our company from nothing," Walter said, in the sort of tone that could silence a dinner party. "Just a genius who dreamed up half our core technologies. Just my closest friend and colleague for 30 years. Well, that did it." Derek's wedding day tan went pale as undercooked pastry. He stared at me as though I'd suddenly grown antlers. You're really co-founder Technova? Primary shareholder?" I nodded quietly, as if confirming the weather forecast. "The very same company, funnily enough, where you spent 3 years explaining to me how business really works." Nancy, bless her, edged closer to her new husband. Her face caught somewhere between sympathy and alarm. She'd known this moment was coming, of course. But even foreknowledge doesn't quite prepare one for watching your spouse unravel in public. Walter's business instincts had kicked in now. He had that voice on, the one you use when you're about to dismiss a mid-level executive or reprice a billion-dollar deal. "Derek," he asked, each syllable sharp enough to slice glass, "exactly what have you been saying to my business partner?" Derek's mouth opened and shut like a fish that had just noticed it wasn't in water anymore. The confident persona, so carefully polished for the big day, crumbled at once. You could almost hear the paper tearing. His Technova colleagues looked on wide-eyed, watching the most spectacular career implosion since someone suggested New Coke. "I didn't know," Derek croaked at last. "He never told me." Walter raised an eyebrow, the sort of eyebrow that has ended more careers and budget cuts. "Worked at Technova, did you say?" "Porter doesn't work at Technova. Porter is Technova. Half the patents in our portfolio bear his signature." That landed like a series of hammer blows. You could practically see Derek replaying every smug remark, every ill-timed piece of advice, every patronizing smile, only now for the far less flattering lens of hindsight. "I can explain," he blurted, words tumbling out like marbles down a staircase. "There's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding," Walter cut in, ice creeping into his tone, "is how my senior sales manager managed to treat my business partner like a charity case for 4 months without anyone telling me." Nancy tried valiantly to intervene. "Mr. Clean," Derek honestly didn't know. Dad never said anything. "He shouldn't have had to," Walter snapped, eyes never leaving Derek. Basic human respect isn't conditional on job titles or bank balances. By now, Derek was flailing, hands gesturing wildly, words collapsing into incoherence. "I always treat people with respect," he insisted desperately. "I was just trying to help, offering guidance." Walter's expression turned arctic. "Career advice to the man who created your job." The nearby guests had given up all pretense of polite chatter. This was better than the band, better than the cake. Derek's colleagues stood frozen, each calculating how far they could shuffle from the blast radius without being noticed. Even hotel staff had formed a perimeter, as though unsure whether to serve more champagne or start selling tickets. Walter advanced methodically, each phrase a nail in Derek's professional coffin. "Respect, you say? By calling my partner unemployed. By dismissing him as dead weight. I never said," Derek faltered. "You can explain your definition of respect," Walter said, crisp as a guillotine, "to human resources. Monday morning. And you can also start looking for new employment." The words landed with dreadful finality. Derek sagged, colorless, his breathing shallow. Nancy clutched his arm, but he was too deep in panic to notice. "There has to be something I can do," he begged, voice cracking like a teenager's. "I'll apologize publicly, take a demotion, anything." Walter regarded him with the air of a man finding mold in vintage claret. "You'll apologize to Porter. Whether that saves anything, Well, we shall see. At last Derek turned to me, eyes wide with the raw terror of a man dangling over a cliff. Gone was the confident executive who had lectured me for months. Before me stood only a frightened young man, desperate and undone. Mr. Wood, Porter, please. I know I've been wrong. I can change. Don't let him destroy me. The room hushed, holding its breath. Champagne glasses hovered in midair. Nancy's eyes glistened with tears, torn between loyalty and heartbreak. Walter stood ready, cold and implacable, awaiting my word. And so the moment arrived. The sword hung in the air, balanced delicately on the edge of my next sentence. Derek, I said at last, quietly, but with all the weight the hall required. Look at me. He raised his eyes, and for the first time, I saw it, not just fear for his career, but genuine understanding. Remorse. I accept your apology, I continued, watching relief wash across his face like the tide coming in. But on one condition. Anything, he whispered hoarsely. Absolutely anything. Never again judge a person's worth by the size of their paycheck, or the label stitched inside their jacket. Character isn't measured in dollar signs, and respect should never depend on bank statements. The words hung in the air, and for once Derek had nothing to add. Derek nodded with such enthusiasm you half expected his head to come loose. Tears of relief, remorse, and perhaps just a touch of exhaustion glittered in his eyes. I understand. I promise. I've learned my lesson. Walter, ever the boardroom hawk, was still watching as though weighing up a takeover bid. His expression said, "Yes, but is it enough?" "Walter," I said, "Derek made assumptions on incomplete information. Haven't we all, at some point in our careers?" Well, that gave him pause. You could see the great cogs of his executive mind turning. Mercy, after all, is not a common line item in quarterly reports. "Are you asking me to overlook 4 months of disrespect toward my business partner?" he asked, clipped as ever. "I'm asking you to consider." I replied gently that sometimes the best lessons come not from punishment but from mercy. I placed a steadying hand on Derek's shoulder. His numbers are good. His work speaks for itself. Perhaps this whole debacle will make him not just a more careful manager, but a better one. Derek, poor soul, looked like a man watching his entire fate being bartered over at a marketplace. Nancy slipped closer, her hand on his arm, reminding him that whatever happened next, at least he wasn't alone. Walter studied him in silence. That long, appraising stare he used to deploy when someone had suggested a bold new strategy, or a ridiculous one. Finally, at length, he nodded. "Derek," he said, in tones of official reprieve, "you'll keep your position, but you're on probation for 6 months. Any hint of the attitudes Porter's described, and you're finished." "Understood." "Completely," Derek managed, his voice thick with gratitude, or perhaps simple exhaustion. "Thank you, Mr. Klein. Thank you both." I extended my hand. He gripped it with all the solemnity of a man clutching a lifeline. "Welcome to the family, son," I said quietly. "And try to remember, everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise." "I will," he whispered earnestly. "I absolutely will." Nancy embraced us both at once, her face alight with joy despite the rather theatrical bumps along the way. Around us, the guests began to exhale, conversations rising again, laughter returning, and champagne glasses clinking once more. Walter clapped me on the shoulder with a grin that was at once familiar and fond. 30 years, and you still manage to surprise me, partner." "Retirement keeps life interesting," I told him, which seemed to satisfy. The string quartet, sensing their cue, returned to their gentle melodies, as though nothing more dramatic had occurred than a late arrival of the pudding. And as I watched Derek move among the guests, I noticed it. The swagger had gone. In its place was something quieter, softer, and far rarer, humility. Sometimes, you see, justice served with wisdom tastes sweeter than revenge. And that, I think, is as fine a wedding gift as any couple could receive.